divers and people who spend a lot of time underwater, what's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing you've seen while in the depths? Not me, but my grandfather recently told me about a story of when him and his friend went diving. Him and his friend were interested in making stuff, and one day they made this makeshift scuba gear and wanted to test it out. So they drove down to where they wanted to go diving and tried them out. The scuba gear ended up working. However, while one of them was down there, they found a dead body. He went to the surface and told the other, who went to check it out for himself. They ended up calling the police and finding out they had been searching for the body. This was in Australia, BTW. Finishing a night dive and stopped with my buddies 15 feet directly under the dive boat. Everyone turned their torches off and was able to see the silhouettes of 30 sharks circling the boat. I was an instructor on Roatan, Honduras, and took one diver on a recreational dive on the beautiful reef there. It involved a couple of swim-throughs, coral tunnels, with sandy bottoms. On the second one, about 50 feet long and 5 feet wide, I didn't bother turning my flashlight on, as I saw my client, who I knew was behind me, although I couldn't turn around and look. Must have turned theirs on when I saw the beam of light passing by me and illuminating things on the wall here and there. When I got out of the tunnel, however, there hovering nearby was my solo client waiting for me to exit. They had never even entered the swim-through, confirmed on the boat after the dive. That creeped me out royally. Also, not far from this dive site at about 155 feet, is a cross put on the reef wall for a troubled guy who years before just kept going into the deep and never returned. A local submarine scientist once saw his gear snagged on the reef wall at about 400 feet deep. Not that creepy, but during night dives I saw 3 different octopi. The adult one moved along the coral and changed colors to camouflage, and the baby ones were bright neon colors. They have the best camouflage out of any animal. Truly a majestic beast. An unending void. That's when I quit and was like, you know, I spent 5 years getting certificates, but apparently being afraid of heights also works underwater. You are not scared of heights, you are scared of the floor being far away. It was last year. I and my friend were testing our scuba gear before going on a vacation in one of the lakes near our city. The depth was around 15-20 feet when we saw Soviet-style army metal beds simply standing on the bottom of the lake, sleeping with the fishes. This isn't my story, but although it was creepy when I heard it, my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather ran a diving business together in a small town. This happened a long time ago, probably mid-60s. My grandma and her friends, one of which was her boyfriend, decided to go down to the beach, and all the boys decided to go into the water and swam near the well-known spot where the current of the water is so strong can drag a boat underwater. The boys went near it and were dragged underwater and killed immediately. They were 14, 15 and 16, might I add. The Coast Guard were notified, and my grandma's dad and his dad were called out to retrieve the bodies. Once the current had relocated them to a safer diving spot, the divers went underwater and found the 3 bodies, and the description still sits with me even 4 years later. I was told one boy, the youngest, had his arm torn in such a way by the current that it looked like it had simply been snapped off. The 15-year-old boy was bobbing around with his eyes wide open and chest bloated, but the 16-year-old boy had his skull caved in, where he was obviously smashed against something hard when he was flung by the currents of the water. I did a night dive in Hawaii called the Pelagic Magic Dive. They take you out into the open ocean around 8 or 9 p.m., attach you to a cord that is tethered to the boat and let you get in. All you have is a flashlight in this pitch black water. I decided I would turn off my flashlight to just see what it was like, and it was absolutely terrifying. I've been around sharks many a time, and this is the first time I was genuinely scared. Switching off your light on a night dive is the most intense sensory deprivation ever, especially in the open ocean. There's any number of things you could be totally unaware of. Probably half a shark, still swimming around, but his entire left side was just gone, organs hanging out of him and everything, like a living Resident Evil zombie shark. He must have been very recently attacked, because I doubt you can live very long with your entire insides poking out. Not me, but my godfather. He was crayfish diving in the Northern Territory, top of Australia. Now you have to be really focused when looking for crayfish. You wanna see their little antennas sticking up, so he wasn't looking around just in his zone. He gets smashed in his leg and pushed forwards in the water and let go. He says he turned around and through the bubbles a massive saltwater crocodile was looking at him. So he used his spear gun to prod it away, not wanting to shoot it and lose his only real weapon. The croc left him alone and he hightailed it out. Now normally when a croc bites down it doesn't let go and it'll just death roll you to oblivion. But he had his diving knife strapped to his ankle. Reckons it's his lucky knife as it saved his life. I did some search and rescue diving after the tsunami in Thailand. It was not creepy per se, but you would find thing that would break your heart. Engagement ring. Gift for Christmas still wrapped. Full wallet with bunch of kids. The most insane amount of CDs and DVD I have ever seen. One creepier thing was that the smell of death was present for the first few days and you knows would get used to it. Most of the divers that was out there developed some sorts of skin infection. We used to shower and pure after a dive. Our knees would be a mess from kneeling in the sand and pulling stuff out of the water. Fun times. I know I'm awfully late to the party, but I'll comment anyways. This story happened to my mom since she used to dive a lot before I was born. She was diving in the coast of Mexico. It was nighttime since the animal they wanted to see only came out at night. This meant they couldn't see 2 feet in front of them. The only visible part was a beam of light coming from her torch and her diving partner's torch. So anyways, after diving for a bit she turns 90 degrees to try and locate her partner, but as she does this she points the flashlight at a great white shark which was swimming directly to her. The thing was only like 6 feet away from her, so my mom couldn't react. But her diving partner pointed the light at the shark and made a spiral shape and pointed the light away from them. The shark followed the beam of light and swam away from them. My mom used to tell me that story all the time and how scared I was. At Sand Hollow Reservoir in Washington County, Utah, there's an old school bus and retired flight school airplane at the bottom for divers to explore. There's a geocache in the bus, so my brother, retired Army Ranger, and myself, civilian mechanic with no diving experience besides trying to beat my son in a breath holding contest in the pool out back, set out to find it on a sunny summer day. After about 15 minutes we found the bus, rusted, rotting and covered in algae. We entered from the back and began searching for the geocache. We found it, signed it and swapped the item out. What we took out was a piece of paper wrapped in multiple Ziploc bags and the zipper cut off and torched to seal it indefinitely. On the paper was a single instruction. Item too large to put in container. Check driver seat. Intrigued we made our way to the front. Now, I wish I was making this up. I was the first to reach the driver's seat. I got to the front and what do I find? A body, wrapped in trash bags and taped with a 45-pound chain around the ankles. I let out a blood-curdling scream like a 5-year-old was just told he couldn't have a cookie right before bed. My brother, without reacting, grabbed the body, pointed to the weight and we made our way toward the surface. Once we got to the surface we put our flag up and got on our boat once it arrived. We called the rangers over the radio and met them at the docks where we met a fleet of park rangers and county officers. They cut the bags while they were taking our statement to find that someone had left 130 or so pounds of sugar in gallon Ziploc bags in the shape of a body. I was snorkeling off the coast of Maui when I felt a stinging pain in my left big toe. I spun around and was eyeball to eyeball with 4 angry fish looking for a free food handout. I've grown up in Hawaii and in the ocean and this was the first time I was the prey. I chase them off and beg visitors to Hawaii, please don't feed the wildlife as one day you may be the food. I usually do shallow water spearfishing here in Kauai, Hawaii. I haven't had yet to find anything supernaturally creepy, but probably something just as impressive. If you're diving in a coral reef there's a chance you'll see a channel. Basically, it's a trench that cuts right through the reef. The ones I deal with are a few meters wide, but they go down for around 20-50 meters. In some areas, you could swim in 2 feet deep water only to encounter a straight drop down into the depths of a channel. These kinds of places are really good fishing spots, but you'd have to have big balls to not be intimidated by these things. Even on days when the water is clear you won't be able to see the bottom. Channels are also a hotspot for sharks and other predators because they connect the open ocean to the inner reef. The channels are still beautiful. Eerie, yes, but beautiful. My dad used to work as a diver and he told me the reason he gave up diving Basically a small boat sank about an hour from our hometown and he was sent down to the wreck to find the bodies if there were any. He quickly located the wreck and opened up the door and a corpse littered with tiny prawns came rushing towards him and essentially hugged him. That was the day my dad decided to quit diving. He told me so many creepy stories that I could write more here. I did a night dive in Borneo once near a sea gypsy, Bajor, village, so we surrounded by a lot of trash, including hundreds of plastic bags floating in the water. You can barely see anything outside the light of your torch, so every so often, without seeing it, one of those bags would brush past you and you'd discover it was actually a big butt jellyfish. One of the most uncomfortable dives I've ever been on. Obligatory not a diver, but my friend was from a military diving unit. Waters around my country are murky as heck. You can't see crap. So once two of them were underwater doing a familiarization dive at night. You can imagine how dark it was. Anyways, their task was simple. Just follow a guiding rope between two boats. Easy. Guy in front, my friend, has his hands on the rope. Guy at the back holds onto the guy in front. Suddenly, the current went batshit insane and my friend lost the rope, getting smashed underwater and hopelessly disorientated. Another hand grabbed his hand and put it back on the rope. Upon surfacing, my friend thanked the guy at the back for finding the rope, but the guy just said he also lost the rope and was clinging on to my friend. They recounted the story to their sergeant major who brushed it off. Once I dove into an underwater cave in Sweden, and I have done it both with and without diving equipment many times, and this time I didn't have diving equipment. When I wanted to get out again I could not find the exit, and had to squeeze through a tiny gap in the cave where I almost got stuck. Not creepy or anything, but I used it to be a commercial tuna fisherman in Mexico. Method perseining. I will never forget the massive hammerhead I swam next to. We had to go in the water to take the porpoise out of the net. Yes, I know. It was freaking cruel, and as I was swimming, I initially saw the head and thought, holy crap, it's a hammerhead shark, until it swam sideways. If I had to put a number on it, at least 18 feet. It was a freaking unit. I was scared because I have never been in the water with a shark of that size, and from what I knew, hammerhead sharks are known to be territorial when hunting, and when I was warning the other guys, the bastard disappeared. Not only is this big butt dinosaur swimming underneath me, I have to be careful of the hundreds of porpoise and the school of fish. So as the tuna start rising to the surface, the hammerhead also starts to surface. That dinosaur slowly rising up. As soon as it is 20 feet away from me, I jump out of the net, into the middle of the ocean. Ironically, the middle of the ocean is safer than being in the net, something I never got my head around. So without checking where the dinosaur is at, I jump back into the net and it is right underneath me, less than 5 feet, biting the stomach of a tuna. At that moment, I just wanted that shark out of the freaking net. 3 tunas later, the majestic beast left the net and forever made it clear I did not want to see big dinosaurs in the water again. Be freaking terrified if you see a lone hammerhead. They hunt alone. If they are alone, they are hungry. I would rather see a group of 5 hammerheads than one by itself. Leading a dive in Singapore harbor during training. Back then, due to the pollution, it necessitated both compass work, being buddy lined and pulling a marker buoy. This was less than 3 foot and one of my buddies said all he could see of me was my fin tips. So swimming a foot off the bottom with full concentration on the compass and marking yardage when my face mask went straight into what looked like a person's head. I can still see it vividly. All the hair moved into an even parting from my motion, and I was looking at their scalp inches away. I will admit to squealing like a girl into the reg and trying to backtrack frantically. However, the diver behind me ran into me, pushing me forward. More horror. However, it turned out to be a dead dog, which shouldn't have been unexpected on the bottom of that crappy bit of water, but sure as heck got the pulse racing. If I had my wits about me, it would have been a lot of fun swimming the other 2 over it, but I hadn't had enough. Proud of myself for getting us to our target after that, given the detour. When I was young, I used to swim at a well-known river. We did bombs and dived as well as swimming about, but at this spot the water was dark but no one really cared. I finally got goggles one day and I dived down and realized there were fish but also massive eels at the bottom just swimming around us. Here, eels can bite if they want. It creeped me out ever since then. Not exactly what you're asking, but I remember one of my dad's old laborers told me when I was a kid that he used to go diving for old glass bottles at the bottom of the Sydney harbour. Apparently people would throw them over the edge of the boat at boat parties in the olden days. They were often imperfectly shaped and worth a lot of money. He said it was quite dark at the bottom of the harbour and he often relied on feeling the bottles to get a sense of their shape. If they felt anything different from a modern beer bottle he'd put it in his bag. One day he said he felt something nudge his side while he was picking up bottles, but the water was too dark and murky so he couldn't make out what it was. A second later his torso was bitten into and most likely in the mouth of a shark. He pulled a small knife out that he had strapped to his leg and used it to stab the shark on the nose. He swam straight back up, rushing with adrenaline, but didn't decompress on his way up and passed out soon after he got back to the surface. Lucky someone saw him floating and he was taken to hospital. Apparently the bite wasn't too serious but he did have to spend 2 weeks in a decompression chamber. TLDR. Diver gets bitten by a shark while diving for vintage glass bottles. Spend 2 weeks in decompression chamber. Doing a wreck dive with my ex-wife off Cozumel. She swam through a passageway and a giant green moray eel popped out in front of her. She swam sideways and caught the edge of the doorway with her ankle, causing a deep cut and clouds of black looking blood began pouring out of her. I grabbed her ankle and tried to apply a compress as we did an emergency ascent. There had been a shark attack recently, so I held her ankle and kept my head on a swivel. It wasn't the sharks that were a problem. We were surrounded by a large grouper who all kept trying to bite at her ankle. She insisted on a safety stop, and I hung below her for 10 minutes trying to compress the cut while fighting off really aggressive large fish. It wasn't really unexplainable, but pretty creepy trying to keep my wife from bleeding out while being attacked by scores of fish. Long-time diver. I was also search and rescue. The worst was recovering bodies from a car that went off a bridge into a river. It was winter so cold water dive. It was at night, which is no big deal since the river is pitch black in daytime. We marked where the car was, dropped our guide rope upstream and then just let the current take us to the car. Your light illuminates maybe 18 inches in front so you can't see crap. You trust your drop and compass. Current was strong so hard to control speed. Within seconds I came face to face with one of the victims. Eyes open, mouth open. I about swallowed my regulator and had to do a nuclear level butthole clinch to avoid crapping myself. That was the creepiest. The sad, most emotional was getting into the car to remove the baby from the back car seat. I had to stop a few times because I couldn't see through my tears. Adults I can handle. Kids and animals no. I was done with search and rescue after that. Now I prefer recreational diving. My time to shine. I was an instructor tech XR mixed gas overhead the whole shebang when I was a young idiot that was pretty much trying to die. I can remember diving in a spring system in Florida with manatees and bumping into something on the bottom. Manatees just normally chill at the top and are literally like big floating sausages. So I looked down and saw massive gator tail swish off into the less than clear water. I've done shark dives in the Bahamas, run into bulls, tigers, the whole gambit. But that right there terrified me. Another fun one was I was leading a group off of PCBC on the twin tugs and had a bull shark follow the entire time and no one else even saw it until we came up. That was hilarious to see their reactions. This is probably a pretty lame story compared to the others here, but I was diving, without gear, in Greece and I was at a beach around at the part where the sandy ocean floor stops and the vegetation starts. I was looking at all the different kinds of fish around there. My dad was swimming with me and I saw a large shadow next to me in the bottom. What I thought was my dad was actually an over 2 featuring fish which was right next to me. I slowly turned and saw one of its inch-wide eyes staring right at me. I started yelling and tried to slap it but it got away. I was doing a night dive in Koh Tao. Just a recreational dive. Dive buddy was a total stranger. We were swimming around trying to find a sandy spot to disturb and see the bioluminescent dinoflagellates. We find a nice spot under a ledge but there is a big green turtle resting there so we continue on our merry way. Didn't find a better spot, turn around, and the turtle's gone. Naturally, we kneel down in that spot and continue by turning our lights off and waving our hands through the water. At this point my eyes have adjusted to the darkness. I look over at my dive buddy and her eyes are incredibly wide. I motion as if to ask her what, and she points over my shoulder, just in time for me to see a football-sized turtle head inches from my face. Really cool experience, but scared the crap out of me. As much as I know they're harmless, it's easy to forget that when they're that close. Another time was when I was on a research dive off of Conch Reef in the FL Keys. I was working on nutrient dynamics of boring sponges, named because they bore themselves into rocks, which consisted of collecting water samples outside of this sponge and from the excurrent water that the sponge filters through its body. In order for me to collect the samples, my face had to be roughly 6 in from the substrate. This was also a night dive while there was a really beautiful thunderstorm happening and my light needed to be off so as not to trick my sponge into thinking it's daylight. So every few minutes I would see a bright flash of light. Side note, was really cool to see other bioluminescent organisms flash back in response to the lightning, but that's besides the point. Eventually I happen to be looking up to see where the other divers are and there's a flash of light. I see there's a giant, probably 5 feet grouper right next to me checking me out. That fricked me up. Had a hard time collecting samples after that, lol. Explainable but creepy. My girl and I did a live aboard for a weekend to dive the flower gardens, 110 miles out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. Most other divers were diving nitrics and had dive computers except us, which meant our dive times were shorter. Our bottom time was limited by inefficient paper dive tables. When it came time to do a night dive, she was scared to go, and the others said they'd keep an eye on me, so I went. Depth was about 90 feet. We followed the mooring line down to the bottom. They attached a glow stick to the bottom of the line. We then trekked about 50 yards into the darkness to the spot. The dive was spectacular. Big black Jack Crevalle would hang out behind you and bump you to attack fish you shined your flashlight on. Dong move on their part, but nonetheless amazing. So it comes time for me to ascend, only no one else's time was up. That's when it dawned on me what I had to do. I gathered up my balls and my crappy little flashlight and headed out into the dark ocean alone, in the general direction of the glow stick I knew was around 50 yards away. After a few minutes I realized that I could no longer see my group's flashlights, and I still couldn't see the glow stick. Pitch black. My blood just ran cold. I was absolutely terrified. When I finally saw a glow in the distance I thanked God. But then I looked up and saw the inky soup I had to ascend through and wondered what grumpkins and snarks were waiting for me at my safety stop. 3 minutes at 15 feet and 90 feet of pitch black ocean, alone 110 miles out in the Gulf. Bait. I turned off my flashlight partly in fear of what I might attract, and partly in fear that I might actually see something. I can still say it is still the most humbling moment of my life. Anybody who is interested in diving, have a search for a film documentary called Last Breath. It came out recently about a freak accident during a saturation dive in the North Sea. I'd taken up the offer of a spare place on a trip to a 50-meter, 165 feet, wreck on the south coast of England. I didn't know anyone else on the boat, so I just got buddied up with another rebreather diver. Talking before the dive, my buddy mentioned that if I lose him then we'd just finish the dive on our own. This should have been a red flag, as in 10 years of diving I've lost my buddy less than a handful of times, but it must have happened often enough for this guy that he thought to mention it. Anyway, we descend down onto the wreck, and with it being England the underwater visibility was only 3 meters, 10 feet, and therefore no natural light reached the bottom. So we need to use our torches to see. We go about the dive and I'm being cautious to keep the guy in my sights. We have a brilliant 40 minutes on the bottom. Then we decide it's time to head to the surface. Given it was quite cold and we had quite a lot of decompression to complete before we can exit the water. When it's time to surface, divers set off a marker buoy from the seabed called a DSMB, which is essentially an inflated bag attached to a spool of string. It alerts the boat where the divers are in the water so they can track the divers while they drift during decompression. When setting off a DSMB you have to clear yourself of all wreckage so that it doesn't entangle on the way up. I signaled to my buddy that we'd swim out from the wreck and set off a DSMB. So I turned and started heading away from the wreck. When I got about 10 meters away I turned around and my buddy wasn't there. He'd obviously not followed me. So now I'm cold, it's dark. I can only see 3 meters in front of me and I'm 50 meters underwater on my own with at least 30 minutes decompression before I can surface. I decided to head back to try and find him. He was nowhere to be seen, but what did meet me was a massive mangled pollock fish. It seriously looked like something out of a horror film. It had one eye hanging out and all its flesh was an off-grey color. It was still alive and swimming towards me. I thought it might have been the start of a nightmare. I decided that was enough in case any more monsters came to visit. So I swam off from the wreck, set off my DSMB and spent the next 30 minutes decompressing, hoping the nightmare never continued. After completing my decompression, when I surfaced my buddy was already on the boat. We figured he must have gone in the opposite direction when I swam out to send the DSMB up. Me and my friend love deep sea diving and some of the stuff we see is scarring. February. We are exploring coral reefs and looking at exotic fish. We were in France. We live in England. We see some cod huddled around something and go in for a look. A dead body. We were pretty deep and on the sea floor so it should have floated up. Nope. The body was chained to this big block of concrete. We were freaking terrified and told the lifeguards, who told the police. The man had a slit in his throat. We were questioned and then released. TLDR. Found a body in France. Oh, I have a good one recently. I tend to night dive a lot at the same site. It's good for teaching night classes and I used to take a friend out to the site for night dives all the time. The crazy stuff would happen during springtime. It would sound like you were right next to an plane engine underwater. Just a super loud drone-like sound. On a recent night dive we had to abort the entire dive because it was so loud that I had to abort the dive. The sound was so loud that my bones were vibrating and I got a massive headache. I was convinced for the last few years that it was coming from the Coast Guard vessels near the site. I would call them and they would tell me that they weren't doing anything at night to cause that kind of sound. The next theory was boat traffic. I eliminated this by ascending and realizing boats were not present. Finally a Facebook group gave me the right answer. During the springtime a species of fish called a plainfin midshipman that normally lives at 400 meters in the Monterey Canyon will swim to shallow waters to mate. The mating call of thousands of these fish is so loud that it was creating the sound I was experiencing underwater. It blew my mind. The scenario doesn't apply to me, but I was in court waiting for my client's case to be called while watching an ongoing trial in relation to a diving accident. Of course, nobody actually knows what happened underwater at the time. Group of friends rented a commercial diving boat, no clue what they're called specifically. 4 went down first and stayed under for about 20 minutes. During the 20-minute, guys 5 and 6 go in. Shortly after, guys 7 and 8 went in. A while later, guys 1, 4 and 7 and 8 come out. None of them said they saw 5 and 6. 1, 4 even said they never saw 5 and 6 enter the water. Search party sent out. Nobody found them. A few days after, the diving equipment was found without the persons and was found to be completely faulty. It was a while ago and there was a lot of diving jargon involved so I couldn't follow that well. Was interesting watching a lawyer who scubas cross the witnesses though. I am not a diver but I live in Australia and was fishing off a kayak and there had been reports of a 5.5 meter crocodile in the area. I didn't think much of it but as I was paddling along I looked down and there was a shadow matching the perfect size and shape of the beast. If it was a croc and not a rock it could have rolled me like a meatball. Most literally. I guess this could count as creepy as it's a near-death experience. This didn't happen to me but to someone I know. He's free dived for all his teen years and this happened in his 20s. He went diving off the coast of Mexico and reached the seabed at one point. His necklace managed to get caught in either seaweed or something of the like and he couldn't move at that point and was running out of breath. The chain wasn't breaking and whatever it was stuck in wouldn't budge. He explained vividly how he had to remain calm and slowly unlink the chain instead from his neck. While on the brink of drowning, he finally managed to remove it from his neck and reach the surface, followed by throwing up and almost passing out. He feels extremely lucky to this day and thankful for his instincts to remain calm where most would panic. There's a lake in France which has a really dark point, meaning it's pretty deep. I think it's about 25 meters or 30 m. So I went there with a friend because we used to freak up about this special point saying there were weird creatures like a kraken or something. Whatever. We were exploring this place with big butt talk lights and there's a lot of things there, mainly Iron Age related sites and old buildings, which is pretty cool. The lake is known for the amount of old pirogues that sank there, but you gotta know that we didn't know all of there when we explored it. Anyway, it's very but at a moment I see a dark pile of something in the distance and I approach and it's a pile of humans' remains. Maybe 5 or 6 total skeletons. So we were really creeped out, but we continued and kept thinking about it for quite some time after. A sound. A horrific sound like someone moaning underwater. Then it changed to a high-pitched noise and then it stopped. I was more startled than scared, but needless to say it completely ruined my mood for diving that day. I was diving in Mozambique one of many times. I love seeing sharks when I scuba dive, but I prefer to be at the same sort of depth as them. We saw 2 sharks whilst at the bottom from a distance, which was awesome. What wasn't so awesome was surfacing at the end of the dive, handing up all my gear, except my mask and fins, and then looking below myself in the water and seeing the 2 sharks circling around underneath us. I have never launched myself out of the water and onto the boat without help until that day. I think my stomach lurching helped propel me out. LOL. Not creepy but very strange. There's a shipwreck in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt where a cargo ship lost a bunch of toilets and bathroom things. The whole bottom of the sea floor is covered with toilet bowls and you can even find fish living in them and coral growing around them. It was a really bizarre dive. Freedive spearfishing off Isla Morada on a low visibility day at about 55 feet. I took a shot at a cobra snapper that was hiding in a large crack at the bottom. He was a big fat 15-pounder, so I was upset when the shot missed. I swam down to retrieve the shaft and a 10+ foot bull shark darted over my left shoulder from behind me. The thrust from his tail almost pulled my mask clear off my face and caused it to fill about halfway up with water. He circled me twice, displaying aggressive body language. Anyone who interacts with sharks frequently knows by their posture and movements when they actually mean you harm. He disappeared back into the muck and I started my ascent. Having been down already for 2 minutes, I was worried I might black out after the spike in my heart rate. The water was so green I couldn't see the silhouette of the boat from the bottom. As I kicked up, he appeared right below me, coming in hot and nipped at my fins before darting away into the green unknown once again. When I hit the surface, I jumped in the boat so fast my baggies fell down around my ankles. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.